Of Malamut Law and Mesa Law and Associates, and everyone here watching on 6abc.com as well. Let's head to Lincoln Financial Field, to the epicenter right now of fandom and excitement in Philadelphia, and let's talk to our man John McMullen, who is at the link. Just, John, on the way in, just can you set the scene for us first and foremost? Tailgate scene, excitement for a primetime playoff game, and what many are expecting to be Jalen Hurts' first playoff win in his career. What's it like in South Philly right now?
It's as crazy as you might imagine, Mark. Even the press box is packed to the gills. Not an open seat to be seen. The noise here is crazy. So obviously people have been tailgating. You know, some Inventive fans buying wings tickets so they can get to the parking lot a little bit earlier. Hopefully they can make it past the second quarter. You got to drink responsibly, Philadelphia. But yeah, everybody is psyched up for this football game. And you know, it's funny. I think the rivalry. We all talk about the rivalry of Eagles versus Giants. I wrote about this week. It's more of fans versus fans, right? The Giants and Eagles love each other. Brian Daboll loves Nick Sirianni, vice versa. Daboll and Jalen Hurts are close from their time in Alabama. I was talking to Linval Joseph earlier this week. The Giants drafted him. He reveres the organization. Thanks him for giving him the opportunity. Even James Bradbury, who was a salary cap casualty and turns into an all-pro player, said, you know, it was just a business decision. He doesn't really hold a grudge. So I think it's kind of interesting. I compared it to sort of Isaiah Thomas and Magic Johnson sort of kissing each other's cheek at center court rather than Julius Erving, you know, strangling Larry Bird back in the day.
Hey, John, you know, we've spent this week comparing and contrasting X's and O's, player versus player, to death. But I think one of the more intriguing scenarios in this matchup is the guys who are moving the chess pieces. You know, we know Sirianni, Steichen, and Gannon. But on the other side, I see Brian Daboll running a very similar offense that he ran in Buffalo with lesser talent. He loves his gadget plays. He loves to move people around. It's been very effective in terms of them arriving to this point. I look at a Wink Martindale. He moves his pieces around. He's telling he's coming after. He hasn't changed. How do you look at it in terms of the coaching matchups compared to the talent on the field matchups?
Well, I think it's two really good coaching staffs, as you mentioned, D. Gunn. Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka is getting head coaching interviews already. Wink Martindale, we saw last week, kind of completely changed his defense. Played, known for blitzing, played umbrella coverage against Justin Jefferson. It worked out, so you have to give him a lot of credit. Very good coaching staff. But, you know, I was talking to one of the Eagles coaches. You mentioned those trick plays. Giants ran Statue of Liberty last week.
Yeah.
And he said, you know, you run trick plays when you have to run trick plays. Right. The Eagles don't think they have to run trick plays because they have the better talent. They have the better personnel. I kind of agree with that mentality.
Yep.
You've got to try different things to make up, and I think you're going to see that from the Giants. The Giants know they're outmanned. Their coaching staff knows they're outmanned, so they're going to try some unique things to even the playing field.
John, you know, last week, if you go back to that Minnesota game, you could just tell there was a massive difference in the way that Williams and Lawrence played in the middle of that defense last week. I mean, they just camped out, you know, at Kirk Cousins' feet, and Dalvin Cook just could not get going in that game last week. As the Eagles look at that, you know, I mean, how concerning is that? Because, you know, they weren't two-gapping. They weren't just playing a single gap. They were actually jumping gaps, slanting. They were doing a lot of different things. And Wink Martindale kind of stepped back from bringing as much pressure as he normally did, but you saw a lot of different line stunts, especially between those two guys in the middle. That disrupts your offense from the standpoint of your quarterback having to move off of his spot, but it also creates problems in the run game where you want to run. It completely takes away the cutback when they get in the backfield and cut off one half of the field.
Yeah, I mean, Dexter Lawrence is a great player, all-pro player. He wrecked that game against Minnesota last week. And you mentioned Leonard Williams as well, tremendous player. But, Minnesota has a weak interior offensive line. So the Giants knew that going in. They knew they could take advantage of it. This week you have Jason Kelsey, all-pro for the fifth time, having one of his best seasons, healthy at this stage of the season, which is very, rare, to be honest. He's been banged up in years past. Then you have Landon Dickerson, who is, one of the strongest natural offensive guards in this league. So when you see Dexter Lawrence being able to bull rush, say Ezra Cleveland on that fourth down play where Kirk Cousins threw it underneath, he's not going to be able to do that, at least consistently, against the Eagles. And Isaac Seumalo, I mean, he's sort of the underreported, you think about this offensive line. Kelsey, is probably the most engaging offensive lineman in the NFL from, hosting his podcast, things like that. We all know Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, he's on The Masked Singer. All these guys talk. Even Landon. Isaac is that old school offensive lineman. He doesn't want to talk. He doesn't want to say anything. And he might be the most underrated player, certainly on the offensive side of the football for the Eagles. So you're talking bottom five offensive line Giants were facing last week, maybe the best offensive line they're facing this week. That's not to say Dexter Lawrence is going to make some plays, because he's a great player as well.
Yep.
But he's not going to be able to wreck a game against this offensive line.
Gotcha.
John, I know you spoke about Jalen Hurts already as far as his health goes, but what do you feel like is a realistic expectation when it comes to the MVP candidate and what we can expect from him today in the game?
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of seeing it. I don't know if you guys are watching Kansas City. I mean, it's different in the playoffs, right? And Patrick Mahomes has a high ankle sprain. He's out there trying to gut through it. Jalen Hurts is going to play. We knew that. Now, he wasn't on the injury report. I always caution people, that doesn't mean you're 100% because you're not on the injury report, and he's not 100%. But what I will say is the Eagles are going to use 100% of their offense. There's no more restrictions. The zone read mechanics are going to be back, and Jalen Hurts is going to play under that circumstance because they have to win this game. And, they're favorites. They're the better team. But the bottom line is you can't mess around in these situations. You can only play next week if you win this week. The Eagles understand that, and the shrink wrap is off Jalen Hurts.
John, just real quick, a follow-up to that. Do you think that there will be any change in the Eagles' game plan, or do you think it will be business as usual, or any attempt to protect how many times Jalen Hurts runs in this game?
Only if they're ahead by a significant margin in the second half. Yeah, then they'll use common sense and scale back and probably, stop the zone read stuff. But as far as from the start of this football game, the entire offense is on the table. Every part of it, and they will use everything they need to use.
Hey, John, what did Jonathan Gannon say this week in terms of how you defend both Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley? I know you're there every day. You get to listen to all the press conferences. I'm curious. I mean, obviously he's not going to tip his hand, but do you have a vague idea of what he's talking about in terms of how he's going to try to defend those guys?
Yeah, now it's going to be an interesting game from this perspective, D-Gun. The fact that the Eagles' philosophy is, stop the explosive plays. Don't get beaten over the top. You don't really have to worry about that with the Giants. Their best receiver, Isaiah Hodgins, they picked up on waivers, mid-season. So this is not a team with A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith or Justin Jefferson last week the Giants played. They don't have that type of playmaker. So in theory, the Eagles don't have to worry as much about getting beat over the top, especially when you have Darius Slay, James Bradbury, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's back healthy. You don't have Avonte Maddox. That hurts a little bit, but there's enough talent there. They could and probably should play more five-man fronts to deal with that running attack, especially early in the game.
Yep.
So I expect to see a little bit more Linval Joseph, maybe a little bit more Jordan Davis than we typically see.
So, John, listen, when you get into the playoffs, one of the things that equalizes a game that a team should win faster than anything else is turnovers. The Eagles led the NFL for the majority of this season. At one point, they got all the way up to plus 13, I believe. Since then, they've fallen, and they're now third. I think San Francisco's plus 13, the Dallas Cowboys are plus 9, and the Philadelphia Eagles are plus 8. Over the last 4 games, they've turned the ball over 8 times. Any significant conversation out of the Eagles camp this week about the importance of protecting the football and not turning the ball over? Because, listen, I just believe, in my heart, I believe that the Eagles are a superior football team. But the one thing that can flip the scales is if the Eagles mess around and start turning the ball over with 2 or 3 turnovers in this game, it can change everything.
Yeah, I think really the demarcation line to what you were talking about, Seth, was the Washington game, right, where they turned it over 4 times. And that was the only game they lost this season when Jalen Hurts played. So from that perspective, I mean, that's what the Giants want to do, what Washington did in that game. And what did Washington do? They controlled the clock. They were able to have the huge time of possession advantage, and they were able to win the turnover battle. So the Eagles have been very conscious of the fact that they have been turning it over too much. They haven't been generating as much as well, so it's kind of flipped. They were at plus 15. They topped out. The second half of the season, that was one of the things that they impressed greatly in the self-scout week during the bye before they knew who they were going to play. The Eagles know the only way they're going to lose this game, let's be honest, is if they beat themselves. And how do you beat yourselves? Turn it over.
John, before we let you go, we've covered a whole gambit here in terms of how we think this game is going to play out. We haven't given our official predictions just yet, but Seth did hint at the idea of maybe Gardner Minshew getting a couple of snaps late in this game. John, where are you at when it comes to this game? What is your official prediction for Eagles-Giants divisional round matchup?
Yeah, I think that old trope of it's hard to beat a team 3 times is not true. Statistically, it's not true. Generally, when you beat a team twice in a season, that means you're better than them. And if you play them a 3rd time, you usually beat them again. Certainly when you're home, and that's where the Eagles are, I think they win this game pretty easily, to be honest, guys. I think I have it at 31-14, and we might see a Gardner Minshew cameo in the 4th quarter because it might be over by that point.
There we go. Even more reason for optimism. John McMullen, thank you so much, our NFL insider for the JAKIB Media YouTube channel, JAKIB Media Sports as well, joining us here on 6abc.com, brought to you by Thrive Financial Services. Thank you, John. Much appreciated. Well, it seems like the confidence is just oozing from this broadcast today, especially when it comes to the New York Giants and the fact that when everyone says and everyone talks about the idea of not being able to beat a team 3 times, and it's hard to beat a team 3 times, those were 3 or at least 2 previous games that were very, very different. But the Eagles today, I think it goes without saying, are the far superior team when it comes to the talent. Just because all of a sudden the Giants did beat the Vikings in the playoffs on the road, and that porous Vikings defense does not mean that they're going to come in here and take on this defense and have the same success.
No, absolutely not. You're going from a marginal defense to one of the best defenses in all of pro football. They were able to exploit that Vikings defense because Ed Donatel refused to come out of that porous zone defense he played all season. Oh, by the way, it cost Ed Donatel his job this week as well. Okay, so now the Giants have to alter their game plan significantly to even have a measure of success against this team, to even have a a slim chance of staying with his team. I think the only way the Giants can stay with this Eagles team is if they try to do something similar to what the Saints did. Control the clock, get 3 to 5 yards of play, and hopefully you can put 7s on the board instead of 3s, and you don't have to play as catch-up as much with this high-powered Eagles offense.
There was something said, two things said actually, by New York media and a current coach and a former player. Let's start with Tiki Barber, first and foremost. I don't know if you gentlemen saw the comments he made earlier in the week talking about this Daniel Jones character and how he right now is more ready to play and win than Jalen Hurts is ready to play and win.
What?
He said right now that Daniel Jones is peaking, Gunner. He is peaking. And I'll say this, as a sports talker, I will say, hey, you know what? Good hustle there, Tiki Barber. You found the storyline that you might drum up some interest from your fan base there in New York. But I will also say this, to Daniel Jones and to Tiki Barber, Daniel Jones peaking levels out at about where Jalen Hurts is average. That's where I think the discrepancy is between their talent levels. So I give credit that he found a storyline he felt he could bang a drum to, but really I think Daniel Jones is the type of quarterback that will have flashes of that that will remind you if you were a Giants fan, hey, why doesn't he play like this every day? But Seth, I don't think today is one of those games where he's going to roll out another example in back-to-back weeks of why he could be a better quarterback.
Well, listen, to D-Gun's point, you know, everybody knew that Minnesota was doing it with smoke and mirrors. You know, and a lot of people looked at this Minnesota team and thought that they were, you know, that they were legit. And even in some of the shows that I did last week, I was like, the Giants are going to win this game. They're like, you're crazy. The Minnesota Vikings with Justin Jefferson and Dalvin Cook, I'm like, listen, they're not going to lose on the offensive side of the ball. They're going to lose it on the defensive side of the ball, okay, because they're too passive in what they do, okay? And because they're so passive on the back end, and this is my issue with passive style defenses, they know that up front that they've got to get there, you know. So they're going 1,000 miles an hour, hair on fire, no concern for, you know, discipline in their rush lanes and things of that nature. And then Daniel Jones, I'm like, after the second scramble, doesn't the defensive coordinator pull you to the side and say, hey, okay, we need to be a little more disciplined? I know we need to get there, but let's get there with discipline. But they just kept doing it time and time and time again. And the majority of those 78 yards that he had scrambling, he scrambled the majority of those yards in the first half of the game. So, listen, I'm not worried about Daniel Jones peaking, because the thing I know about quarterbacks, pressure is every single quarterback's Achilles heel, okay? It's every single one of their kryptonites. We watched Tom Brady wither, you know, under the pressure, big time. We're talking about a guy who's got 7 Super Bowl rings, but when the pressure gets on him, he turns into a whole different animal, okay? Especially if you can't move. But if you can apply pressure to Daniel Jones is the type of quarterback that he's been very good this year not turning the football over. Why? Because he hadn't been under pressure. They've been playing this quick passing game, hurry up, get the ball out of his hand. Get the ball to Saquon, you know. And when you're going to play that way, and we're going to rely on the defense to make some things happen and give us good field position. But at some point in time, now we're at that point, and I always talk about when you get down to the Final Four teams in each conference, you got the best coordinators, you got the best head coaches, and you got the best 4 teams in each conference, okay? Now is where the rubber meets the road. Now is where it meets it. And Jonathan Gannon's going to have to step up. He's going to have to step up and prove, you know, that what happened in the regular season wasn't just a fluke, because it's a massive difference between what the play looks like during the regular season and what it looks and feels like once you get into the playoffs.
Seth, you talk about how Daniel Jones has been able to dink and dunk his way down the field. If Jonathan Gannon doesn't have his guys come up and play more press coverage, that's exactly what Daniel Jones is going to do tonight. And that's going to allow the Giants to control the clock and work their way down the field. Jonathan Gannon has to do a much better job of mixing up his schemes.
D, this is exactly – so I talked about this on my show this week. For me, it comes down to this, okay? Quarterbacks have gotten to the point, and offensive coordinators, where they attack your tendencies and your weaknesses, okay? And I'm not saying that there's something new going on, but if I know that I run the ball to the right and the left defensive end is going to crash every single time, I know I can have the bootleg anytime I want it. So I'm game planning off of his lack of discipline and his technical and fundamental flaws, okay? So when you talk about D-Gun, what Daniel Jones brings to the table, you got to understand what that offensive staff is. That they're looking at, okay, how do we efficiently put together an offense for this guy where he doesn't feel the heat of the moment, okay? So I said, from a technical standpoint, you can play man from off to up. You can play zone from press to bail. That's what Jonathan Gannon needs to implement within the scheme of his defenses, because these quarterbacks are being taught to pre-snap read. So when you see these teams playing cover 3 and the cornerbacks are 8-9 yards off the ball, the veteran quarterbacks, the guys that's been around for a while, the guys that are well coached, guess what they're going to do? They're going to raise up and throw it out there, and they're going to take those 5 or 6 yards, and if you miss the tackle, guess what they're going to do? They're going for 15.
Yeah.
So you just got to continue to give them different looks, and that's always been one of my issues with Jonathan Gannon's defense, is they line up like statues pre-snap with 15 seconds left in the play clock, and there's no doubt what they're in if you're smart enough and you've done it and you've prepared. But if you're getting guys up and you're getting them back and you're moving them around and they're going from inside technique to outside technique, and your linebackers are getting up in those A-gaps and sugaring and affecting protections and things of that nature, now you got a chance to confuse a quarterback. You got a chance to throw some doubt, inside his psyche. But if you just line up, it's easy to play quarterback that way.
All right, I mentioned there were 2 things that were said that I thought if the Philadelphia fans should take exception to. We'll get to the second thing coming up in a second. Tiki Barber, that's the message to you. And then what Wink Martindale had to say earlier in the week. We got a jam-packed show the rest of the way here on the road to Glendale. We're going to be going into the Eagles tailgate scene with our friend Joe Messa, and Alan Malamut will be taking us on the field at Lincoln Financial Field to set the field there. We'll be back in a moment here on the JAKIB Media pregame show.